It's a nine-core banger. Dr. Ross dropping knowledge to the masses. Man, you now tuned in to purpose and practice. Ayy, yeah, purpose and practice. Keep your mental sharp, learn all the tactics. Dr. Ross dropping knowledge to the masses. Man, you now tuned in to purpose and practice. Ayy, yeah, purpose and practice. Podcast game, ayy, he got it mastered. It's encore.
Hey, what's up, and peace to everyone out there in the Purpose and Practice podcast community. We are so excited to be back for another episode. We got another fire episode with a great story, a great narratives. Remember, what we're all about here at the Purpose and Practice podcast is about bringing you stories and bringing you narratives. And we have such the ultimate narrative that we are going to bring to you today. And I hope you have time to sit with us for the next hour to hear more about our guests. And we have a special guest, a Long Branch, alum we got in the house. We have Dr. Virian Serei. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. This is what we're all about, Doc. We're about having folks here on the platform to share their story. The whole notion of what we love to do, the critical aspects of it is to showcase stories. I don't like to say giving folks voice because I think we all have voice, but it's about creating a platform to showcase those voices. So that's what we do here at the Purpose and Practice podcast. So once again, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Doc, if you don't mind, and I don't know if you rather me call you Dr. Serei or Virian's fine. Let me know.
You can just call me Virian.
Okay.
It's totally
Virian.
fine.
Okay.
Virian is good.
So that's what we'll do.
It always feels weird when people call me that.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? Here's what I'm going to say. I always ask though, because and obviously, there are different circumstances and contexts that, we use such titles. But I always ask, just to show that respect to folks. So that's why I do. So, Virian, if you don't mind, just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself to our community.
Sure. So my name is Virian Serei. I was born and raised in Long Branch, and I'm very proud of that fact.
Yes.
So I have a lot of pride. Yes, anyone that I know. So right now I am a hematopathologist at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. So basically, as a pathologist, I don't really see patients. I kind of do diagnosis. I look under the microscope, I look at cells, and I make diagnosis. So I kind of do things a lot behind the scenes. That's pretty much what I do on a day-to-day basis. I live in Mattawan, Aberdeen now. I do miss living down the street, but from the beach.
From the beach, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's sure.
So you're doing. So when folks hear about, it's almost like usually when we have physicians and doctors, a lot of us from our visits to doctor's office and hospitals, we're used to having a doctor who comes into the room and talks to us and speaks to us and works through and explains different, whether it's a diagnosis or prognosis or what have you. Now, is your role different?
Yes, so my role is very different, and I think we're kind of the doctors that no one sees, but we're actually pretty important. And so I did go to medical school, like most doctors, and then I specialized in a field called pathology, sort of like your cardiologist or your oncologist. They specialize in a certain field. I decided to specialize in the field of pathology. There's a couple reasons for that, but I think, everyone kind of is drawn more towards a certain skill that they have. And for me, I think my skills are more kind of behind the scenes. So looking under the microscope, making diagnoses, and, it still plays an important role in patient care because you need an accurate diagnosis in order to
Yes.
treat the patient. And we work very closely with the doctors that you see on the floors to help, guide them towards the right treatment with the right diagnoses, particularly with what I do. I work with a lot of the doctors at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, going back and forth with clinical history and, what the docs on the floors want to do with their patients and kind of help guiding them with what I see under the microscope. Sort of like a radiologist, you never really see a radiologist, but people I feel like kind of know what a radiologist does more than a pathologist.
Yes.
Um,
And it's I'm happy. Obviously, it's your passion and it's what you wanted to do. And we're going to hear all about what led up to you, being who you are today, professionally, personally, and all sorts. But I love to hear more about careers and passions that are more behind the scenes, because I think that they kind of get pushed to the side a lot. Like, we don't always hear about those important behind the scenes roles, whether it is in medicine or even in TV or so on and so forth. We don't hear a lot about those stories and why those positions and roles are so important. So I'm happy for that reason, even that you're on the show to tell us more about, what it is that you do.
Thanks.
Yes. So what we love to do here, since you told us a little bit about what you're doing now, we love to start the show off by going back and hearing more about you growing up and what growing up was like. You mentioned you were born and raised in Long Branch. So if you don't mind, we go back down memory lane and share some of the stories of coming up as a young person in Long Branch.
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, I was born and raised in Long Branch. My parents actually came from Cambodia back in the 70s. They came to New York City and they met in New York City. And so I guess Cambodia, I'm not sure how many people know this or not, but, it was in the 70s, this communist regime came in and basically drove everyone to the countryside and did this huge genocide. My parents were already here when that happened, but they lost a lot of family members during the whole thing. So growing up, I was born and raised here, but I always heard about, the old country and that was the biggest thing also with my parents, the whole genocide and, and all of that had happened over there and them losing family members. So that was, I think, a very big role, played a very big role in my upbringing, that identity, plus also being born here, you kind of want to be American. And
yes.
So you kind of go back and forth between those two identities. But yeah, my parents were great. I would say that they were probably a little bit strict sometimes, but it was a great childhood. I have one brother, Soria. He lives in Vancouver now, and he does some very big things out there. I miss him a lot, but he comes to visit. I had a very happy childhood. I had a lot of cousins who I always spent a lot of time with. I always liked school. I liked going to school, of course. And I just really loved being a part of the Long Branch community. I think, I think it's a very unique community that, I feel very fortunate to have been a part of. For me, it was a very happy childhood. I loved going to the beach, riding my bike around outside. So yeah, it was great.
What street did you grow up on?
I grew up on Cedar Avenue.
Cedar. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And if you don't mind, explain in relation to the beach, because a lot of times what I find when I go outside of Long Branch or even outside of the States, folks kind of recognize our area by how close to the beach we are. So if you don't mind explaining to, in relation to the ocean.
Yeah, so my house is literally like 3 blocks away,
Yep.
3-ish blocks away from the beach. So, I would always, ride my bike, go running. I still do. I'll drive down there to run on the boardwalk. And yeah, it's very close. And I think the boardwalk and the beach was definitely very different than it is now. I think, people are like, oh, you're from Long Branch, Pure Village. I'm like, oh, yeah, but it's more than Pure Village.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. And when I was growing up, it was like Kids World was like the big thing. And it's funny because it's almost like Peer Village is the like Peer Kids World times 100 or 1 million. But it was when I went off to college, a lot of the folks that I met, the kids that I met, students that I met, when I told them where I was from, they said, oh, that's the place where Kids World was, or the Haunted Mansion was, because it was, like the infamous Haunted Mansion, in Kids World. They would always identify us, through that. So you grew up there right on the ocean, literally like right on the beach. You talked a little bit about learning, and you referred to it as the old country, but you talked about learning history, right? And learning about the way that things were in Cambodia through your parents. Were those like intentional, like, hey, sit down, I want to talk to you about this, or did you just kind of like acquire all of this, like kind of just growing up, and it kind of came about here and there?
yeah, it definitely wasn't a sit down, let's talk about it. It was like not a constant, but like, just like kind of worked into daily life, I think, I guess it would be like a lesson, or I don't know when to say lesson, but it was just like, I would say it was more like incorporated into, like childhood, or just, every, I don't know how to explain it, but just like, if, my mother, I feel like my mother made sure to never let me kind of forget where our family came from,
Yes.
and how much, sort of she felt like, her parents had sacrificed, so that she could be there, when they weren't there, and that
Yes.
sort of thing. And, and I
Yes.
think even as an adult, that's still, you kind of still think about it too. Like when you see a lot of things going on in the world, it's like, oh my gosh, why is this stuff still going on? These
Yes.
evil people out there.
Yes.
So.
And that's why I asked that, Varian, because I think that, and I started off on this show and talking about, I love for this show to be a collective memory, so to speak. And
Sure.
I think that, those of us, I feel we all have roots. And one of the greatest fears is losing connection, to those roots. And that's why I always like asking that question in the show, purpose, because I think that our roots many times give us the purpose, and it sounds like that's what you just explained, in a certain kind of way. And it's not always sit down, hey, I'm going to tell you this story, but it's through the ways and actions, the life, the living, the day to day that you begin to acquire, what's important to us and what we value, and things of that nature. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely do agree. Yeah.
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 So you're in Long Branch, you're growing up. We know that, you were a phenomenal student, but
Thank you.
how does that, at what point, and I'm going to ask a question, maybe you didn't like school, but at what point did you realize that you were a good student?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah, I guess, I guess it's a very good question. I never really thought about that.
It's because I think it's one of those things where I always, when I talk to young people and ask them about their school experiences, many times they have negative school experiences, and they're usually able to pinpoint moment or time or space where they begin to kind of like adopt these negative experience or negative feelings towards school. But when I asked it flip, those who had more positive and affirming school experiences, sometimes it's harder for them to say when it was.
Right. That's a very interesting point. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'll say that, I would say that my mother is probably the driving force behind a lot of my successes in school. I think she probably saw a lot of potential in me, I'll be honest, and I think she saw the potential in me and really pushed me, even sometimes when I didn't want to be pushed. And I do think though that things probably came a lot easier for me than some people. And I did, and I did notice that. But I think, I do think she was a lot of the driving force behind a lot of things that I have done in my life. And I did work hard for, a lot of things. Like I said, I do think some things come easier for me, but I have also known people, they can just sit down and just remember things like that. And I am definitely someone who has to, read a book over and over before I can memorize something. And so I would say part of that is also kind of my work ethic, which I think my parents have instilled in me. But yeah, I mean, I do remember in kindergarten, I started out in Elberon school. And I think one of the teachers pulled my mother aside and was like, you have to put her in the gifted class.
Wow.
And my mom was like, well, she's kind of, and the gifted class at the time was at West End School. And my mom was like, she's kind of already with, her class and she's in the school. And, no. So I didn't actually end up with the rest of the gifted kids until 4th grade, I guess. I had gone to Garfield School for 1 year, and I guess the teacher was like, she has to go to the class. And I was pretty unhappy with my mom. I'll say that, like leaving Garfield School, because I'm going to be honest, I'm a creature that does not like change. I stayed in New Jersey. Okay. Sorry, it just went dark for a second.
Yeah, you lost you. But you were talking about being a creature of habit. I think that's where you were headed. Yes.
Yes. So I really didn't want to change schools. And my mom was like, no. You've got to go. This is like the second time, someone has said this to me. And, and they used to give me extra work in Elberon School, and only even in 2nd grade. Because I guess they saw something in me. And yeah, so I joined this class in 4th grade where everybody knew each other. They had known each other since kindergarten. That was so intimidating for everyone listening out there.
Yes.
Who may be listening from 4th grade. But it was probably one of the better things that, definitely that I did, because I think, I met a really great group of people. And I think a few of us are still friends to this day, and awesome. And that's great. And so like I said, I think it's kind of like along the way, people helping me realize my potential too.
And I think that's
still riding my bike around.
I think that's important because you mentioned a few things, and you did identify. You said kindergarten, so we got it out of you, like kind of where you go back to, hey, kindergarten. But you identify, being pushed, and your mother seeing something in you. You identified a teacher seeing something in you, and you also identify hard work and putting in work ethic. So it wasn't like, I just roll out of bed and here I am, ready to conquer the world. And when you think about those 3 things, I think are ingredients for much success in many spaces. I think having folks outside of ourselves who believe in us, and who kind of speak future self into us, greatness into us is important. But then we also have to have some ownership in terms of, all right, what am I going to do, with this talent or with this ability? I want to ask you, you talk about your transition, which there's so much research and studies on gifted and talented education, whether we call it tracking or so on and so forth, and the social ramifications of those things, and you kind of mentioned that, like, there was a different peer group they were together since like maybe first grade or kindergarten, and here I am joining this world. Do you feel that you automatically cracked into that social world, or did it take time?
So I think for me, I think it took time. And I think that's just my personality. I'm definitely a quieter, shyer person. And definitely when I was younger, that, definitely was more of the case. I mean, so when I was in kindergarten, they actually wanted me to start off in ESL, because when I started in kindergarten, I literally did not want to talk to anybody. And my mother practically begged me to talk, because she's like, English, you can do this.
Yes.
So I think for me, I think that's just how I've been probably my entire life. But I think eventually I, was able to kind of navigate through my shyness. And, I think that's taken time over the years. I think people see me as very personable and, but I think that's taken a lot of time.
To get to that point. Wow. That is very interesting. Even that ESL bit, I feel is a really good point. And it happens a bunch, where there is sometimes over, quote unquote, if we want to call it, I hate to call it disproportionality, but there are a lot of ESL students who, are misdiagnosed, so to speak. Like you talked about, I wasn't talking, but it was by choice for you.
Right.
And then your mom was like, okay, you need to talk. You need to go in and be more social. And then that changed, because it's like you start wondering, had you ended up in an ESL class, what would have been different for you in terms of academic experiences, and that's a whole different rabbit hole we can go go down into, which there are great folks doing great things with ESL educators, which I have something I'm going to share with you a little later that
sure.
may make you smile with that in mind, but you go through the acculturation thing. You start to, totally new peer group. You go into middle school, right? From over at Weston School, which is where the gifted and talented program was. You end up in middle school. What was middle school like? What were those experiences like?
Middle school, I just remember not really liking middle school too much. I think it's just an awkward age.
Yeah.
I think there were times people would make fun of me. I can really remember why, but I just think it was just a weird age. And also, like I said, I'm normally a very quiet and shy person. It's how I've been probably my entire life. So I think that probably added on. It's just like this awkward coming of age, that is just a little bit weird. But I loved high school. Just when I think back to middle school, I just remember not liking it as much. But like I said, like when you really look back, it's like, well, why was it? Was it because someone like made fun of your shoes or something, or whatever? Like
those things that middle school kids do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And, not too many people look back and say, oh, those were the best years of my life. Those middle school years were but they're
Right.
make or break. It's almost like they're survival years. And unfortunately, some don't survive those 3 years. In most cases, middle school is 6, 7, and 8. but they are years of survival. I have two middle schoolers who live with me, my son and daughter, but they are, you know, they're in survival mode right now for so many reasons that they have no idea of what their bodies are going through and why their bodies are going through these things. But I think that is a time of kind of like, all right, how do I get through these years to get to high school? You know?
Right.
Yeah. So you make it, you get into high school, and even through middle school, if you can tell us middle school, early high school, were there any extracurricular activities that you were into? Because I find that that's kind of a way sometimes to make even middle school less painful of an experience.
That is an interesting thing. So in middle school, I started out doing field hockey, and I honestly don't know why I even did it, because I really didn't like it, to be quite honest. I just wasn't good at it. But I don't even know why I did it, maybe because everyone else did it. And it was just like an extracurricular thing to have. I did do band. I do remember doing that. And that was fun. I played the flute. I started playing the flute when I was in Garfield school. And I enjoy that too. I enjoyed music. So I think I did that, and then I did field hockey. But I really, to be honest, I really did not like it, but I still did it through high school, and I still didn't like it.
Wow. You did it all 4 years? Did you do all 4 years?
I did do all 4 years in high school. I wasn't very good at it.
Wow.
And I somehow really, and I actually did try to quit my senior year, but I think they were so desperate. They actually called me to come back, and I was like, really, you want me?
Wow.
But I did it.
Wow. And, you know, and that's another thing, you know, and working with young people, I always find that young people join teams for different reasons. Some, you know, because they may be they may have that athletic prowess. Others want to be connected to team. You know, and so maybe that was it. Maybe you just felt like, you know, that team connection was a good thing. Yeah. So, but very, very interesting. So you did the field hockey, you in the marching band. Now you said band, you were marching band too? Or did you?
So I ended up not doing marching band in high school. I think for some reason I opted to do field hockey instead. Like,
gotcha.
Looking back on it, you know, it was like I probably would have enjoyed marching band a little bit more. But I think at the time I felt like it was so much time commitment to do both. I think I started out doing it, and then I decided not to do it. And I also did lacrosse in high school, which I actually enjoyed much more than field hockey.
Lacrosse is a cool sport.
Yeah.
It's a cool sport. And it must have been relatively new then. I'm going to say, in Long Branch anyway. I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to say that it would have been relatively new.
Okay.
Because the boys, we just got a boys lacrosse. When I say we, meaning Long Branch, not maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
That we started a boys program for lacrosse, but the girls program was around for much longer. But you enjoyed that more.
I did.
Yeah. So high school in terms of academics, we talked a little bit about the extracurricular. Talk to us a little bit about, you know, what the difference was between like taking that jump from obviously you're gifted and talented into middle school, which I'm assuming you were in maybe honors placement classes or advanced placement during that area. And then you get to high school in terms of the workload and what type of work ethic you had to bring to the table. Can you just talk to that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, you know, I feel like I've always had a very good work ethic. I guess looking back on it, middle school was probably different from high school. But I feel like I just kind of brought the same work ethic to high school. I also really just also enjoy learning things. Like sometimes when I find things interesting, I kind of absorb it better. And so I think that's probably, what happened in high school. Um, Definitely moving up through the years with the AP courses. Um, I was always a studious person. I definitely know that, um, I would definitely study and work pretty hard. And I definitely knew some other people who, would just like look at a book and like, okay, I'm going to go take the
It was.
exam. And they actually did pretty well. Whereas like,
Hmm.
I was kind of the opposite, so to speak. I mean, I always kind of knew I was a good student, but I feel like I always had to like kind of reinforce the things that I
Mm.
had to learn, if that makes sense.
Mm. No, it does make sense. And I think it's that type of vulnerability is really important, even for you to share it, because I think sometimes there are a lot of assumptions made by, students who have success in school, that it's kind of like a natural, it just comes to me naturally, and there's not a lot of work. Can you talk to us about moments of, and maybe failure's not the right word in high school, but moments where you just felt like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
things are just not working out, or pressure, maybe moments of pressure, where stress, whether it was keeping up with academics and everything else. Can you talk a little bit about that, if you had any experiences like that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. Because when you ask that question, I think more of when I was in medical school, like me
Mm,
actually really feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I don't necessarily think I ever felt that in high school or even college. I think maybe like when I took the SATs, like a second time, I feel like maybe I put a lot of pressure on myself to get a better score. But um, I think for me, I don't, I feel like for me, that feeling of just like feeling like I can't do this was really for me when it came to med school. I think
that's
that
when
was
it
like,
hit. So
yes.
you got through undergrad, you get to med school, and then that's when you started feeling moments of like, all right, things are on the line here. There's some stress here. So up, but let me ask you this then, Varian,
Mhm.
were there things from high school, and maybe not high school, but maybe undergrad, or some experiences, or even some mentors and teachers who kind of put you in a better situation, so that when you got to med school and started having those stressors, that you were like, you had something kind of to lean on? Or do
Mhm.
you feel like it was just, you just had to, kind of work through it?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Yeah, definitely. I definitely think all of my teachers in high school have taught me something, not just like in the books, but
Hmm.
I feel like I've been lucky enough to have some very kind teachers, that I remember well and fondly and always think of. Um, and yeah, I think, I definitely look back and think about them and think about how proud they would be, or just some of the things that um I'm trying to think of specific instances. It's like I feel like I haven't thought about high school in so
And
long.
so, yeah. Well, but let me, you talked about medical school, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know, I'm going to share this, and I don't know what this is back. What years would you have been in medical school?
I would have been I took a weird route, but it would have been like 2009 to like 2017
Okay.
ish.
Okay. So I'm going to share this with you. All
Oh
right.
my goodness. Okay.
So now, I told you that I had, because, I don't know if you remember this, but it's so funny of me asking you to be on this show, because this is '08, as you can see. I was so happy that the date was there. I took this picture, and that is some of your, I mean, Mr. Loveland's
Yeah.
there, Mr. Clark's there, Mr. Morales is there, and Mr. Freeman, who was the principal at the school at the time. And I don't know if you remember, but this is during a time where I wanted students former students from Long Branch to come back and speak to current students about some of their experiences. And you were like one of the first, people to come back and speak. I don't know if you remember this.
I do remember this. Yes, I absolutely do. Yes.
And you were talking about your experiences. You talked about your high school experiences, which, this slide kind of speaks to you talking to these are, at the time, these are, I believe, ninth graders. You were speaking to a group of ninth graders here. And you talked about your high school experiences, but then you also went into some of the academic programs at Rutgers, where you were at. So now with this kind of framework,
right,
looking back now at this, even this slide, and thinking of where you are now, could this have been a moment where did you have any kind of like, all right, what's next for me? Or, where am I going from here? Like, take us back to this moment of Virian.
Sure. This is 2008, you said,
This
right?
is 2000. This is March 20th, 2008.
Okay. Because I know I came back twice, and this probably was the first time. Yeah. So March 2008, actually, yeah. So I was in college then. I was probably a junior in college. I was really into research and working in the lab. Like, I really love solving problems, and it's part of the reason why I became a pathologist, but I had no idea I'd become a pathologist at the time. And, I was kind of stuck in this, do I kind of go the research route, or should I go to medical school sort of thing? And I was still kind of up in the air with that. And I think at that point, kind of still didn't really know where I would be headed or what I would be doing. I think I was probably studying for the MCATs and just having fun in college and, doing my classes, going to classes, taking my exams, hanging out with my friends in college. And
good stuff.
Yeah, I just remember being so excited to come back and just talk to students about, my experiences and to hopefully inspire them to, work hard and follow their dreams. And, everybody's successes, I think, are their own successes. I mean, whatever they choose to do in life, as long as you have some sort of goal. I think, I feel like one of the things I always like to say, is I just don't think things are handed to you on a silver platter. And I think that's kind of what I, wanted to inspire the kids at the time.
And I think that, even, and I know many of the students in this picture here, even from the backs of their heads, not saying that this very moment inspired them, but it's part of that, just like you talked about, those outside motivators, such as your mom, such as your family, such as your teachers and professors and so on and so forth, believing in you, in kind of almost I keep referring to future self, but that's a big part of what I'm interested in terms of research. And I think that things like this, in days like this, they last forever in the minds of young people. And let's just look for 1 second. Do you see that outdated overhead that we were projecting? Look at that. That is crazy.
Does that not exist anymore?
Isn't that, when you just think about the technology in the classroom at this moment, even the classrooms are much different. But I thank you obviously for coming back and doing that. And I feel that even when I asked you to do this show, there was zero hesitation. It was I'm game. Yes, I'll definitely do it. And I think that this show is a variation of this day. This is the same type of energy that I wish to bring, to the world. So I'm going to ask you, you talked about med school and you talked about some of your first challenges coming. Now, you graduate from Long Branch number 1 or number 2?
I was number 1.
Okay. I just I just wanted to throw that, that softball out there for you. So, there's, to put that out there. But you graduate top of your class in Long Branch, and you go off, you do your undergraduate thing. What's your undergraduate major, by the way? What'd you major in?
So I majored in biotechnology. So it's sort of like biology, but kind of almost like kind of focused in the laboratory.
Okay, so you do a biotech, and then you go off to, now, is med school like, I want to do it? Because you went off and you accomplished earning both your MD and your PhD. Was that the ultimate plan from entering college for you, or did you come to that realization?
That was not the ultimate plan. My first plan was to just go to med school because, to be honest, I think that was kind of just expected of me from my parents. I'll be really honest. I don't think that's really a secret, but and and it was just like, well, I'm really good at science. I actually really like science, so let me just do this. And so I became a science major, and that wasn't a problem at all. I really enjoyed science. I like learning about stuff. I like figuring out stuff, solving problems. And what happened was I fell into research because part of the program I was in, I had to do a semester of research, like 1 credit. And I was like, okay, let me go find a lab and just to get this over with. And it turned out it was the best thing I probably could have ever done for myself in terms of opportunities and just really figuring out what I wanted to do, because the lab that I was in, they did research on little bacteria that eat up oil. And he was actually very well funded. He was really good in supporting his undergraduates. And I ended up working in that lab for the next 4 years. And I went off to meetings internationally, fly all on, Rutgers's or his grants dime. And it was like just so wonderful. I had so many opportunities to not only, go to these meetings, present my research, and then also to see different places. And I think that also, I kind of fell into something I realized I liked to do. And so that was kind of how I ended up in the PhD thing. Because the thing was, I wanted to really go more the research route. But so long story short, I ended up just like, okay, let me apply to these MD PhD programs. And I ended up getting into the one up at New Jersey Medical School, which is Rutgers or back then it was UMDNJ up in Newark. And so it's an 8-year program, and you basically do your MD degree and your PhD degree. So you do 2 years first of your basic science courses, and you kind of take a break and just do research, like you're working in a lab towards a thesis. And then you go back to med school. And, like I said, to be honest, I was kind of not really like, I don't think necessarily going to med school at that point was like, oh, my passion. Like I really wanted to be in the lab, do research, find the cure for something and, do that. And, it just seemed like a really great idea because, to have like medical training and to do a PhD would kind of be to like bridge these two, the basic science and the medicine together, because sometimes the basic science, there's a disconnect. People get really focused on what they do without realizing there's real world implications.
The other side, yes. Yeah. Which is like, you said that, but that is such a big thing in terms of whether you're going to talk about it's a theory or a theoretical world, in world application world. There's unfortunately, there is often a huge gap there. Was that challenging to do both, because they are almost separate worlds?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was very challenging in a couple of different ways. I think, well, for one, I think for me, I don't think it is such a different world that when I entered medical school, I found medical school very, very difficult. I think there's just such for me, for being someone so detail focused and, having to take all of these standardized exams and just really just study, it was just very difficult for me those first 2 years of medical school. It was really difficult. I ended up also having to commute to Newark from Long Branch. So that was also very difficult on top of that. Once I entered my PhD program, I was just so happy to be out of medical school. I was like, oh my God, thank God I can be in the lab, my safe space. I can just, I have a lot. It's just such a different world. You have so much independence. You're really working towards a project. You make your own hours. It's a very different world. And then you go back to medical school. It's very regimented. And your hours are crazy, and you still are taking exams, even though you're kind of working in the hospital, 12 hours a day. It's so different. It's difficult, I feel like, in ways you don't expect. And it is such a disconnect. I do think it probably gave me a unique perspective once I came out and did this practice, the specialty that I ended up in. But yeah, it was for me a little bit difficult. I think that was probably the first time I felt like, oh my God, I need to quit.
Well, what kept you going though, Virian? What was it that kept you motivated, that kept you going? And even if it was outside, and I know, you talk a lot about the drive that you got from family. Were there other things that kind of, that kept you focused and kept you going?
That's a good question. I think I don't necessarily like being a quitter. That's just part of my personality. So that's probably part of it. But, I think realizing that I feel like for pretty much a lot of my life, you go through school, you go through I started off, you go from kindergarten to first grade to second grade. I go from Melbourne school, I go to Garfield school, West End school, middle school, high school, college. Now, I ended up in med school. And, you feel like you're supposed to follow this one path. And then, and I feel like in a way that's kind of always put a little bit of pressure on me to follow this path that I feel like, okay, I've always set this path. But then once you kind of realize well, it is what you make of it. I don't necessarily have to spend the rest of my life, doing something I don't like. It's not permanent, right? If you, want to do something else, if you want to do something that makes you happier, then there's a way to do it. It might not be right now, but whatever is making you miserable or unhappy, it's not permanent. And that was part of the thing that pushed me through it. You kind of have to learn that along the way. And a lot of people also told me that too, those difficult hours or days or times when you just want to cry, it's not permanent. It is temporary, and there will be, there's up and downs of everything, but it's never permanent.
It's so much easier said than, I know you're even sitting here I'm saying that now, but it's so, because, even as adults and, even as those who are, deep into our careers and whatever those careers may be, there's instances where it's just hard, and it's hard to see that it's not permanent. This is a stage. And sometimes people say, those difficult times, you kind of got to embrace them. And that sounds really, really good. But going through it, you just want to cry and be like, enough, enough. What talk about, if you can, and I don't know if they were important to you, but I know in any program that I was in, even going back to, I was in college when I first went undergrad, I was in a first generation college student program, and I relied a lot on my peer group. And I relied a lot on the other students who were in my cohort. Did you have cohort support? Did you have peer group support that you kind of found yourself leaning on?
Absolutely. Yeah. So definitely, I think, so I have friends from different parts of my life. So I would say for me in college, I was friends with a lot of people in my major, similar classes, and we were going through the same thing. And college was honestly one of the best years of my life. And, and I had such a great group of friends, great roommates who were going through the same thing. They were studying for their exams. We would do things together. We would also take a break and have fun together. And when I went to med school, I ended up commuting. And for the med school portion, for me, it was a little bit harder because I didn't feel like I related to a lot of the people there for a lot of different reasons. I just, maybe part of that was maybe I wasn't living on campus. Maybe, I just didn't feel like I belonged. And I think that was also part of it in med school. For the first time, I didn't feel like I belonged.
Wow.
And that was like a weird feeling, to be honest. Like, I just, I almost felt like, oh my God, I'm an imposter. Like,
wow. I'm not going to let you not talk a little bit more about that. That is like well, because when you say, was it ability? Was it, like, I don't feel like I'm at the same level as these folks, they had different type of preparation, or was it like more culturally? Was it like a racial identity piece? Like, if you don't mind digging a little bit into, because a lot of, let's be honest, you were into territory that was, there's a lot of legacy in those territories, and there's a lot of folks who their parents did this, their grandparents did it, their great-great-grandparents did it. So I can see, for me, I'm just thinking of me, and I don't know, I want to let you talk about your experiences. Like, there's so many things that could have crept into your conscious about belonging.
Yeah, and I think all of those things are, was a piece of that puzzle, looking back on it. I think, for me, the material was just so difficult. It was just so fast paced. I do think I was like pretty prepared for it. But I also think probably, getting to that point, your mind almost feels like, okay, I am with all of these kids who, are just so driven. Not that I'm saying no one else that I've been with in my life has been like super driven, but we come from different backgrounds. For me, going to Rutgers was almost like an extension of going to school in Long Branch, because I'm used to a very diverse, down to earth atmosphere, and that's kind of what Rutgers was for me. But then, going to medical school, it was also a state school, but it was a little bit different because now I've got people coming from all over, and it's kind of like you were saying, like you have people who have a legacy. And I think, for me also, I've also learned, you have to kind of have balance in life. And then, I just saw people who, every day was all about like school. And it was just like, oh my God, it was like giving me so much anxiety.
Like anxiety,
like, should I be doing this too? And it's like you're comparing yourself to other people as well. And and there were also people who were just like shocked that I was from Long Branch. It was just like,
wow.
Like, and it was just like, and that for me, I was just like, okay, well, it's like, oh, did you go to Long Branch High School? You say you're from Long Branch. I'm like, yes, I did. Thank you. And it was just like, it's just like I just felt almost, it was just like a weird time. And, maybe my mindset going into it was probably different. But I think you end up navigating that and finding the people that you can be friends with, that you are naturally drawn to, that have similar values as you. And you know, I think in med school it was just like, whoa, like it was a little bit different for me.
Yeah.
I think that was a little difficult. Once I went to grad school, I think it was a little different. I think everyone's mindset there was a little bit more like I feel like we were a little bit more like-minded. I enjoyed grad school way better. And you know what? I was in a lab that we had a lot of great camaraderie. I think in med school you also have a little bit of a level of competitiveness,
yes.
that it was just a little difficult for me.
Yeah, I'm happy that you shared that, and because there's so much difficulty that come in those spaces, and it's very hard to describe. It's very hard. Like it was almost like you couldn't put your finger on it, but it was like a feeling that that feeling though. Like it was a feeling, and I'm happy that you shared that, because there's so many young people who are now going to be entering these phases and stages, and hopefully they listen to your story and they hear, through your testimony that, there are ways to navigate through those experiences, because a lot of times our first instinct is to give up. And you talked about, I never want to give up. It seems like it's the easiest thing to do sometimes, is to be like, all right, this place is not for me, or, these people are not the kind of people I want to be around. But I'm happy that you shared that, and I really appreciate you in terms of your vulnerability in sharing that story, because I think it's a very important story. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, you do the that's a lot. It's so much to unpack there. Even those who are out there who study in terms of researching, in terms of things, supports that young people need to navigate certain programs and so on and so forth, to be able to put in place some of these supports to help, students through, because there are sometimes great odds that when we're entering these realms that, for us are uncharted territories that we have to kind of fight through and navigate through. So you do your med. Now, did you have to do residency?
I did. So I did a residency in pathology. I actually just finished last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I actually really loved residency. And I think some of the lessons I learned from some of my kind of difficult identity finding times in med school was like, I had to make it my own. And, because I did say to myself, I really do not want to do residency. I don't think I cannot do this for another however many years. But I realized I had to find something that fit into what I enjoyed doing and what I felt like would be something that would be good for my skills and be useful for society as well. Like I could never go out there and be an emergency room doc. I am not good at doing things quickly, and I can never do that. And kudos to anyone who has gone and done that. But I just knew that I could not go and spend the next 3 or 4 years of my life on the floors rounding and feeling that way. And fortunately, I found pathology, and that was just the perfect fit for me. And I'm so glad I found it, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have done a residency.
Yes. And you talked about one thing that has come up a few times during our conversation was balance. You talked about balance a few times. So what does Virian do for balance? Like you obviously have a very demanding, passion and career, but what is it that you do to say, all right, I want to unwind a little bit? What does that look like?
So unwinding for me is just spending time with my family and my friends. I feel like even in med school, once I sort of realized like, oh my God, this place is crazy. There's so much to do. I realized like I really needed to make time for the people who are important in my life. And I think that thankfully carried on with me through residency. And I think that's just so important to have you time and spending time with the people who have always been there for you and have always supported you in your life, and also for yourself as well. So I do see my family and my friends often. And I also really enjoy exercising. I mean, pre-pandemic, things were a little bit different. I was always at the gym. Now I just can work out at home a lot. But I do a lot of Zumba. My girl Dee at Jersey Strong in Tin Falls on Monday night.
Shout out to Zumba in the Tin Falls. Did they go 24 hours? I think I don't
know.
Oceans did.
Yeah.
I know they went 24 hours. So shout out to the Zumba. I didn't know that Zumba was still a thing.
Oh, it is. I mean, I guess like, I've been doing it for a couple of years now, a while now. And, there's this one fantastic instructor. It's very, she does a lot of great choreo and I just love it.
Awesome.
And so that is something. And once that came back after the pandemic, I was like,
yes,
I don't care. I have to go. It was like always my thing, like, always my thing to do. And, I did a lot of yoga before the pandemic, not so much now, just because, I haven't really just gone out to the gyms a lot, but, Zumba was the one thing, like once it came back, I was like,
yes. And I think that, I like to ask about that work-life balance because even me personally speaking, I can get so wrapped up in work that I lose focus of those things. You talked about family. You talked about, there's someone I graduated high school with, Denise, talking about that work-life balance. But I think that it's very, very important. So doing the Zumba, especially being active, I think that that's a very, very important thing. Any other hobbies in terms of, outside of Zumbaing and spending time with family, any specific hobbies that might be, worth sharing with the group?
I mean, specifically, besides that, I mean, like I said, I used to do a lot of yoga and I don't really anymore. I do work out a lot. I like just going to the beach. I find that my happy spot. And even if it's like the middle of winter and I just need some like mental clarity, whether it's in Long Branch or over here, I just being near water and just like kind of like clearing my head is also very important to me. What else? I mean, I am trying to get back into painting. I used to paint a lot actually in high school. So I thought, what better time? I'm done with residency.
Get back into that's why I like asking that question. And I don't like to leave it quickly because I think sometimes when I ask it, folks will say one or two things, but then I'll stay silent and let them keep talking, and now other things pop up. So painting, so there it is. I think that balance and hobbies, and I think that those things are really, really important. So I appreciate you sharing that. Virian, this has been like a special hour. I'm so, in many ways, going back over 10 years ago. You did something similar, and I was like, let me go search for those pictures, and I searched because I knew I had them in my camera, and I was like, let me go back because I think I have those, and I was so happy that I was able to find them because I remembered you coming back and sharing your story with young people, and now you come back and share your story with our Purpose and Practice podcast community. And we are very, very thankful for having your story now a part of our story. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Now, no one gets off of the show without answering this question, all right? So our final question for all of our guests is, if you could go back to high school and give your high school self advice, what would that advice be and why?
Okay, so when you first asked me that, told me to think about it, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? But I think as I have been talking about my life and thinking about a lot of things, both personally and professionally, I think, I would just go back and tell myself to just be open and just be open to anything that comes in your life, no matter what it is. Don't automatically brush it off. Don't, because you never know what's going to happen.
So true.
You never know. And, I think when I was younger, and I don't know if this applies for everyone else, but I think sometimes you think that your life is going to be a certain way. And it sometimes you kind of take this route and you learn a lot of different things, but I think it's important to be open. And I think sometimes I have had some trouble with that, but just be open because you never know what's going to happen to you.
I love that. I think that that's really good advice. And you said that a few times. You talked about sort of like pathways. And sometimes I think we think that everything is like this linear path. And life is never, I'm not going to say always that way. Life is never that way. So I agree. I love that advice, to be open. And I love the simplicity of it. Just be open, to be open to different things. I love that. Any last words that you would like to share before we say goodbye to the community? Jaleesa, thank you for the comment.
I guess nothing much. I mean, just like I said, be open. But just remember to, nothing is handed to you on a silver platter. Be open, work hard, be a nice person.
That's most actually really important thing. Yes,
that is so important. Probably the most important thing. You would be surprised.
Yes, that goes such a long way. So
be respectful about
it. And I think that those are jewels. Those are gems to share. We are very, very, very happy to have had you here. Jaleesa, one of our former guests on the show, she was on the show as well. Thanks for tuning in, doing great things on your end. But we are very, very thankful for your testimony, your story, your narrative. I learned so much about you, and I'm happy that you were able to share that. So thank you again, and thank you for taking the time, an hour out of your day, very busy day, I'm sure, to share with our community. So with that said, I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Those of you who will be tuning in, whether it's on the podcast or watching the video later on YouTube or Facebook Live or what have you, thank you for your support. With that said, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to show this old school picture, Virian dropping jewels to these ninth graders who didn't know if they were coming or going, ninth grade year. And a shout out, to a cool group of teachers. Some of these are your former educators. So we are definitely happy to have you here. Oh, we got geniuses there.
Thank you, Jaleesa.
Yes, Jaleesa, I agree. And I wasn't going to say this, but we're definitely going to have your brother. He's already agreed to be on the show. So he's got an episode coming up soon, too, that I'm looking forward to. So, again, huge shout out to you for showing us the love tonight, and to the community, to those of you who joined in. Thank you for joining in. Peace out and stay safe.
It's a 9-chord banger. Dr. Ross dropping knowledge to the masses. Man, you now tuned in to Purpose and Practice. Purpose and practice. Keep your mental sharp. Learn all the tactics. Dr. Ross dropping knowledge to the masses. Man, you now tuned in.